There is a truth that the comfortable will never admit out loud. The clock does not hand out favors to those who wait politely. The universe has never been impressed by permission slips. It has always answered to momentum, to decisions made in the dark, to the stubbornness of people who act before they are ready. Picture Edison bent over a bench he could not afford, surrounded by filaments that snapped like brittle hope. He did not wait for validation from an audience he had yet to find. He moved, picture Lincoln writing laws in the shadow of ridicule and defeat. He moved, picture Ford in a noisy, oily workshop where failures were routine and breakthroughs were scheduled. They moved. These are not parables of destiny. They are manuals of method. The winners do not stand in the doorway asking for clearance. They step through, change the lock, and invite the future in. This is not about bravado. It is about the anatomy of courage made practical. Courage is not an emotion that arrives like a guest. It is a discipline you cultivate. You manufacture it with repeated small acts that accumulate until fear becomes background noise. The mind will not leap into a different life until you rewrite its daily script. That script is written in sentences you repeat, in commitments you keep, in the rituals you defend against the seduction of comfort. If you think desire alone will ferry you across turbulent waters, you are mistaking a spark for an engine. Desire without design is theater. Design, clear, ruthless, unambiguous, creates pathways for desire to walk. Start by commanding the inner language you use to describe your life. Replace I hope with I will. Replace someday with this quarter. Language does not simply communicate. It instructs the nervous system on which possibilities to fund. When you speak in the present tense about the future you intend, your body begins to align with that future as if it already exists. This is the first act of reprogramming. Assertive language becomes firmware. Then build rituals so small they resist reasonable objections. 5 minutes of focused writing, 1 deliberate outreach, the single most important task placed at the top of the day. These are not symbolic, they are catalytic. Small acts repeated daily compound like interest. The person who writes 10 minutes a day will be years ahead of the person who waits for inspiration to arrive. Clarity is the lens through which persistence becomes effective. Vague dreams drown in the noise of daily life. The brain will not pursue a fuzzy target. Specify the outcome you desire with the precision an engineer uses when drafting blueprints, numbers, deadlines, the sensory texture of success, the office light, the handshake, the sound of your own voice explaining what you built. When you give your unconscious a map that is not ambiguous, it will begin to root attention toward it. Notice how Ford's obsession was never about cars. It was about repeatable production and motion. On an industrial scale, his clarity created processes that made success reproducible. Your clarity should do the same. It should transform chance into sequence. Belief is not a luxury. It is currency. But belief is not magic. Belief is proof in motion. You manufacture belief by building small, undeniable victories that act as pillars for bigger truth. Do not wait to feel certain. Create certainty through evidence. This is the mechanic's approach. Build a prototype, test it, collect feedback, iterate. Every prototype that proves one variable shifts the weight of possibility toward conviction. Napoleon Hill taught the world about autosuggestion. The modern application is brutal and practical. Flood your senses with real, measurable returns. Consume testimonies, yes, but create your own data. The world is more persuaded by a ledger of outcomes than by inspirational language. Discipline is not punishment. It is architecture. The undisciplined mind fritters potential into options. The disciplined person converts choices into policies that the future self cannot negotiate away. Make rules that are absent of mood. No phone until the biggest task is finished. 2 hours of focused work before emails. A weekly audit on Sunday night. Policies remove negotiation. They convert willpower, a scarce resource, into design. The astonishing thing about policies is that they eventually become identity. The person who follows a policy starts telling themselves stories consistent with that policy. I write every morning. I ship on Fridays. I protect my calendar. Identity and behavior become a feedback loop. Act like the person you aim to be until your nervous system accepts it as truth. Action must be both relentless and intelligent. There is a universe of noise between busyness and meaningful progress. Winners do not confuse motion with advance. They do not fetishize activity. They seek leverage. They set up controlled experiments, decide an action, define a metric, set a short time frame, measure, learn, scale. Speed of iteration beats perfection. Edison did not veto ideas by fear of failure. He created experiments that produced information at scale. Ford measured throughput. Lincoln counted votes and adjusted rhetoric. Be pragmatic. Ship fast. See results, then refine. The advantage in life often accrues to the person who learned one day earlier how to measure what mattered. Gratitude is the chemical recalibration that turns scarcity into strategy. It is not softness. It is resource management of the spirit. When you habitually name what is working, you increase your cognitive bandwidth to find more working elements. Gratitude is a signal to the brain. This environment is not hostile. It contains assets to be leveraged. Practice a night ritual. List 3 outcomes that advance you today and the small actions that cause them. This is not self-congratulation. It is bookkeeping. The person who logs gains learns which inputs drive outcomes and then reallocates toward them. Adaptability is the muscle that keeps advantage alive in a changing world. The markets, technologies, and expectations of value mutate faster than our comfort allows. Learn frameworks rather than recipes. A recipe helps you bake one cake. A framework lets you bake anything with the same ingredients. Read for models, practice for skill, teach to clarify. Force yourself into discomfort, intentionally public speaking, sales conversations, deadlines that demand production. Because most growth sits just beyond the edge of what you know how to do. The person who becomes quick at learning and quick at deploying becomes a living asymmetry in any competition. Resilience is not stoic endurance, but engineered recovery. Systems break. The question is whether your system includes repair. Build recovery protocols, sleep, movement, relationships that tell the truth, routines that lower friction in crisis. When failure hits, treat it like a lab result. Extract variables, adjust models, run the test again. Speed of recovery compounds into invulnerability. The resilient person does not varnish pain into heroics. They convert pain into data and return to the work with revised methods. Your network is not an HR list. It is your external nervous system. Curate it with tactical intent. Seek people who will tell you hard truths and then roll up sleeves beside you. Masterminds are not mystical. They are brutally practical. Truth, accountability, leverage. Invest in relationships that produce 10 times returns in insight, access, and emotional ballast. Generosity accelerates this. Give value before you demand it. Service is a multiplier. The person who seeks to extract without contributing will find their path clogged. The person who becomes indispensable opens doors more quickly than they can knock. Purpose organizes energy. Vague good intentions become hobbies unless tied to a problem you intend to solve. Define the problem. Define the people you serve. Quantify the outcome that proves impact. When pressure arrives, as it will, purpose keeps you aligned. It converts grind into meaning and meaning into stubbornness that outlasts obstacles. Purpose is not a slogan. It is the engine that tolerates the miserable parts of the journey because the destination justifies the price. There is no entitlement in growth. Waiting for permission is a luxury the world ignores. Start with the tools at hand, the time you can steal, the micro actions that compound. Rehearse the life you want in your daily choices. Speak with the voice of someone accountable. Move without waiting. The winners do not circle the field for approval. They step into play and make opportunity react to them. If you are serious, make the smallest defensible commitment today. 1 minute of focus, one outreach, one sentence written, and then repeat it until your nervous system mistakes it for habit. Momentum is the currency of change, and it is minted by action. There is a fracture in the lives of most people. They believe effort will carry them everywhere. But effort without architecture is wasted energy. You can run until your shoes disintegrate and still circle the same small patch of ground if your actions are not aligned with a clear, commanding framework. The winners, those who sear their names into time, do not merely work hard. They design systems that force progress. Imagine a watchmaker assembling gears so precisely that time itself keeps order. Your days must be engineered the same way. Begin by converting amorphous ambition into operational commands. Don't say, I want to write a book someday. Say, I will write 500 words every morning at 6 a.m. Don't say, I want to start a company. Say, I will validate 3 customer interviews this month and build an MVP by the end of Q1. Commands shrink the horizon into reachable fields. They make the abstract concrete and the possible inevitable. This is where clarity rips through indecision, like sunlight through fog. Clarity is not just knowing the destination, it is mapping the milestones, naming the risks, assigning the metrics. When you habitually translate dreams into testable hypotheses, you remove the romance from procrastination and replace it with machine, like iteration. Ford didn't build an empire on hope. He built it by measuring throughput and eliminating waste. Edison didn't wait for inspiration. He measured filament resistance until one filament held. The winners are obsessed with feedback loops. Propose, measure, refine, scale. If you are not measuring, you are guessing, and guessing yields excuses. Belief, then, becomes the architecture's foundation. But belief is not static. It is a moving ledger you refill with small evidences. The modern winner treats belief like capital and spends it on experiments that return more belief. Begin with micro-investments, a short public post, a prototype sent to 5 early users, a difficult conversation initiated. Each successful return compounds confidence. Napoleon Hill called it autosuggestion. Today, we call it deliberate exposure. Flood your life with proof until your internal bank balance of conviction grows heavy enough to underwrite bigger bets. This is not delusion. It is calibrated optimism. Optimism backed by a series of controlled wins. Language is the mortar of identity. The sentences you feed yourself are the instructions set your nervous system executes. Speak with the grammar of inevitability. Replace hedged verbs with present tense assertions. I will try becomes I am doing. I might collapses into I am. This is not bluster. It is operational clarity. When your speech tightens, your decisions harden, and your calendar begins to obey a higher law. Embrace declarative language, not as a trick, but as a commitment mechanism. The kind of small brutality that forces follow. Through discipline is the long, patient work of converting policy into identity. There are 2 kinds of people, those who negotiate daily with their future selves and those who make accords the future self must inherit. The negotiators rationalize. Today is different, and the accords enforce. Decide a set of non-negotiables and defend them like sacred artifacts. These rules are not meant to strangle joy. They are meant to free it by removing the endless friction of choice. Your brain is a poor judge of long-term value in the heat of the moment. Design your environment so choices favor the person you aspire to be. Put the running shoes by the bed. Delete the distracting apps. Schedule the deep work block and label it no meeting. Make your surroundings obey your intentions. Action is the lifeblood of all transformation. But action without strategy is a noisy exercise in motion. The winners move with targeted fury. They identify leverage points, the single tasks that collapse complexity into results, and they attack them with a surgeon's focus. The difference between a frantic person and a strategic person is the ability to prioritize by asymmetry, choose the actions that produce exponential returns rather than linear satisfaction. Call the right contact, publish the first draft, launch the imperfect product, and learn faster than those polishing in private speed of iteration is the modern advantage. Faster feedback converts mistakes into forward motion. Gratitude is often miscast as a soft virtue when, in reality, it is tactical clarity of perception. Gratitude shifts your internal ledger from scarcity entries to assets. When you habitually name what is working, you illuminate leverage you previously ignored. It helps you see which people, resources, or processes are already moving in your favor, so you can double down, practice a nightly accounting. What 3 things moved the needle today, and why? Use that information to redirect energy tomorrow. Gratitude becomes not a surrender to contentment, but a sophisticated way to reallocate resources effectively. Adaptability is the survival skill of the thoughtful. The world rewrites rules while you blink. Learning to change is not optional. Winners cultivate learning systems, portable methods of acquiring skill under pressure. They do not merely consume knowledge, they deploy it. Read to build models, not trivia. Practice new skills in public so feedback arrives early and raw. Teach what you learn. The act of teaching forces precision of thought and speed of assimilation. The faster you can internalize new languages, technical, cultural, or procedural, the more resilient you become to market shifts. Flexibility compounded with competence becomes dominance. Resilience is not about lion. Like stoicism, it is about engineered comeback. Build routines that restore you faster than stress dismantles you. Sleep, movement, ritualized reflection, and honest social mirrors are not luxuries. They are repair systems. When setbacks arrive, break them down like a laboratory specimen, isolate the failure's variables, test, redesign, and relaunch. Emotional processing matters. Do not doom yourself to endless replay of mistakes. Extract the lesson, then reset. Each recovery reduces the fear tax on your future decisions. Over time, resilience converts pain into acceleration. Your network is not a trophy shelf. It is the engine room of leverage. Surround yourself with people who increase the velocity of your thinking and the radius of your reach. But do not confuse volume with quality. Seek allies who will not merely flatter, but will demand your best and hold you accountable. Create relationships that are reciprocal and catalytic, where the help you give opens doors that the help you receive could not. In the economies of influence, generosity is a high-return investment. Give expertise, time, or honest critique before you ask, and the social system will begin to repay you with access and opportunity. Purpose is not a feel-good tagline. It is the magnetic field that organizes your energy. When the days harden into fatigue, purpose endures the ugly middle because it translates grind into meaning. Nail down the problem you exist to solve, the people whose lives you will measurably improve, and the metric that proves you were of service. When pressure knocks, this clarity keeps you aligned. It converts hardship into honorable cost rather than pointless suffering. People who anchor to purpose do the hard work not because it is comfortable, but because the work matters beyond their momentary feelings. Finally, understand the brutal economy of time. Time does not care for intentions. It responds to systems. Winners do not wait for a perfect season. They harvest the marginal hours and compound them. They protect sacred blocks where creation happens, writing, designing, selling, free from the tyranny of reactive service. Calendar discipline is not control freakery. It is the means by which you steal the future from inertia. Guard it like capital. When you put these elements together, clarity, Belief created through micro. Evidence, language hardened into command. Policy converted into identity. Ruthless targeted action. Gratitude as strategic perception. Adaptability as learning velocity. Resilience as engineered recovery. Networking as leverage. And time as protected capital. You create a machine that produces momentum. Momentum is not the byproduct of one heroic day. It is the outcome of many ordinary days that obey extraordinary rules. The winners do not wait for permission because they have already built permission into their systems. Their days are designed. Their proof is logged. Their language is decisive, and their network is awake. You can choose to remain in the queue of the hesitant or step into the workshop where results are manufactured. The choice will not feel dramatic when you make it. It will feel inevitable because you have prepared everything to make it so. There is a moment, always, when a life stops being accidental and begins to be deliberate. That hinge is not dramatic. It is habitual. You will not wake up one morning and find that the world has rearranged itself for you because you read an article or had an inspiring day. The world rearranges itself for those who rearrange their days first. Think of it like a camera focusing. Blur remains until someone turns the ring. Focus is not glamorous. It is surgical. It asks you to cut away the half-hearted goals, the sympathetic distractions, the projects that feel important because they flatter your identity rather than stretch your capacity. Winners cultivate a ruthless regard for focus. They schedule storms into their calendars and let the rest of life orbit at safe distance. This is not denial of joy. It is prioritization of harvest. You plant now where the soil is best, and you do not water the weeds. We must talk about the anatomy of influence, because influence is the fuel that multiplies action. Influence is not about followers or glossy profiles. It is about competence and reciprocity. Andrew Carnegie understood that power accrued to those who could connect resources to needs better than anyone else. Walt Disney understood that influence comes from creating irreplaceable experiences. Steve Jobs understood that influence is the consequence of design meeting practicality. Influence accelerates permission. You do not wait to be given access when you have already demonstrated service. Build artifacts of competence, projects, prototypes, essays, conversations that solve specific problems. Publish them into the world. That is how you become indispensable. Give first, make meaningful contributions, and watch the world begin to lend you doors. Now listen to the mechanics of momentum. It is cumulative and requires consistency. You cannot sprint a year into a life you want to live. You must compound small practices until the machine of your life operates on autopilot. This demands two things: initial grit and system design. Grit gets you to the baseline. Systems keep you above it. Implement rituals that protect your best hours. Protect your mornings like a fortress. Use that time for your high-leverage work, the creation that no one can do for you. Guard the first 90 minutes as if it were a deposit account that accrues interest. Make withdrawals only for the investments that will return more than you spend. People who win mornings win days. People who win days build decades. There is a common lie. I will wait until I'm ready. Read that sentence in the language of factories, and you will hear its bankruptcy. Factories don't wait for the paint to be perfect. They fix the paint while the production line runs. The winners ship imperfectly and graduate to excellence through iteration. If you long for a clean starting line, you will never start. Begin with what works and refine. Richard Branson famously launched ventures with rough prototypes and better conversations. Jeff Bezos launched with a clear customer obsession and iterated relentlessly. Their stories are not myths of spontaneous genius. They are chronicles of deliberate iteration. Fear will try to seduce you into safety by offering reasons. It will tell you that risk is foolish and that comfort is wise. It will point to exceptions and say, "See, That's evidence you should not move. Do not mistake fear's caution for wisdom. Fear seeks to protect a narrative you have carried about yourself, a narrative that keeps you small but familiar. Expose that narrative to sunlight. Write down what you fear. Give it a deadline for examination, and design experiments that reduce uncertainty. Once you convert fear into a map of manageable variables, it loses its power. The courage you need is not thunderous. It is a steady, daily willingness to accept discomfort and to name the next small action despite it. Education used to be a credential, and now it is a currency of adaptation. The person who wins will be the person who learns faster and applies sooner. Curate a reading list not for prestige, but for utility. Learn frameworks for negotiation, for product design, for persuasion. Practice them publicly. So failure arrives quickly and lessons embed deeply. Teaching is the accelerator. When you teach what you learn, your understanding sharpens, your mistakes show sooner, and your mental models deepen. Build a micro-lab of continual learning, a weekly project that forces you to integrate new ideas into action. The individual who moves without permission is always learning, and thereby always becoming less dependent on permission. Remember that grief and pain are not detours. Often they are the material from which strength is forged. Abraham Lincoln's losses did not break him because he learned to make grief an instrument. He turned sorrow into perspective and used it to govern with depth. Failure and loss teach economies of humility that arrogance cannot purchase. Do not try to be unbreakable. Instead, cultivate repairability. Develop rituals to process setbacks. Write the facts, list variables, consult a trusted circle. Rebuild faster. Resilience is rehearsal plus recovery. The quicker you can return to purposeful work after a blow, the more speed you compound into your life. There will be people who tell you to be patient and others who tell you to hurry. Both counsel useful extremes, but neither is strategy. Patience without urgency becomes procrastination. Urgency without patience becomes frantic and unsustainable. Winners calibrate. They have long time horizons anchored by immediate urgency. They are patient about outcomes, but relentlessly urgent about daily actions. Hold both simultaneously. Be patient with the timeline of mastering a craft, urgent about the scheduling of a day. We must address money because it is the practical oxygen of projects. Money is not the measure of worth, but it pays for the capacity to create more worth. Treat finances like an enterprise. Revenue as feedback on value. Savings as runway. Reinvestment as growth. Craft a fiscal policy. Reserve a runway. Pay yourself a model of discipline. Invest in capabilities and protect liquidity. People who hoard without investing slow their trajectory. Those who gamble without runway create disaster. The skill is allocation. Where to allocate scarce capital of time and money for the highest return. Your legacy is not an eventuality. It is a sequence of daily decisions. Legacy is the product of attention. Notice who you become when no one is watching. Those habits are the seeds of your impact. Build practices that are invisible yet decisive. Keep a ledger of integrity. Honor small promises. Respond quickly. Apologize where necessary. Hold to high standards of craft. These invisible acts aggregate into reputations that open doors long after a single project ends. Now, take this into your limbs. Make a contract with the next 12 months. Not a wish. A contract, use numbers, dates, and sensory detail. Write it in present tense as if it is already happening. Break it into weekly experiments. The winners do not hand their contract to fate. They test it, they measure, they revise, and they enforce it on their calendar. The secret is continuous micro-adjustment. Most people wait for the world to hand them confirmation. Winners do not wait, they build the evidence. If you are listening now and you know change is necessary, do not ask for permission. The universe will not issue an appointment. It will respond to the clarity and motion you supply. Stand up and perform one small, honest act that has defensible costs and measurable returns. Send that email. Finish that chapter. Publish the first version. Call the person who will change your trajectory. Make it measurable and make it immediate. Do it within the next 10 minutes and record what happens. Momentum begins with the first small, visible step. This is not pep talk. This is engineering advice for a human life. Design your days, craft your language, manufacture belief, enforce discipline, act with surgical focus, practice gratitude to reorient perception. Learn faster than the market rewrites its rules. Recover more quickly than you fail, and build a network that multiplies your moves. When you do all these things with steady resolve, permission is no longer a gatekeeper. It is a result. The winners move without permission because they have already built permission into their operations. Now go. Do not linger in this emotional architecture of possibility like a tourist admiring a painting. Step to the canvas and begin to paint. The brush is in your hand. The time is now, and the rules are plain. Move without waiting for someone to say yes. Build the evidence that will make yes inevitable. Your life will not wait for your permission to be remarkable. So stop waiting for permission to be remarkable. There will be 1,000 reasons whispered into your ear. Why now is not the right hour. Why your rough draft must wait. Why your asking will be met with refusal. Those whispers are not warnings. They are the predictable static of any field where decisions are rare and comfort abundant. Learn to read that static for what it is. A sign you are close enough to the edge to make a real move. The difference between the person who halves their dreams and the person who expands them is not luck. It is the tolerance for the ugly first attempt. Walt Disney did not build Disneyland by waiting for perfect terrain. He built imagination into reality by assembling assets, hiring people who shared a fever, and refusing to postpone the first shovel. He moved without permission and then invited the world to follow. That pattern is replicable. Assemble what you have. Call it a beginning and iterate loudly. Your life will not reward neutral intentions. It rewards clarity, speed, and the stubbornness to show up on bad days. Show up when your muscles burn with fatigue. Show up when your calendar is jammed and your friends are available for ease instead of challenge. Show up when the algorithm favors content that is polished and you only have rough edges. There is an argument these days for starting small and quiet, but do not confuse smallness with timidity. Start small with the ferocity of someone who knows how to expand. Begin with one meaningful act, executed with excellence, and then repeat it until expansion becomes the only option. There is a grammar to influence, presence, craft, and generosity. Presence is the courage to be visible. Craft is the relentless sharpening of skill. Generosity is the decision to give value before expecting a return. Combine these and you begin to attract not just attention but durable support. The world responds to those who make others better and to those whose work is a signal of reliability. When you are the person people bet on, permission stops being necessary because they hand it to you in the form of resources, trust, and opportunity. Make someone else's life demonstrably better, and doors will open that no application could unlock. Do not romanticize suffering as if hardship is inherently noble. Suffering without a plan is damage. Suffering converted into methodology is fuel. The goal is not to pile pain as a badge, but to distill lessons quickly and extract the tactical edges. When failure comes, and it will, pull the scalpel of analysis. What did we assume that was false? What variable moved differently than predicted? Who benefited from our mistake? And how can we use that feedback? Turn emotion into data, and then turn data into a revised plan. This is how the relentless become unstoppable. They treat setbacks as short-term inputs rather than permanent sentences. There will be moments when the numbers do not align with your soul, and you must choose between easier prestige and harder results. Choose results. Choose the messy, uncomfortable path that produces proof. The glossy route gives applause. The disciplined route gives outcomes. If you craft a life geared toward outcomes, the applause becomes incidental and the work becomes sovereign. That is the difference between people who chase signals and people who generate them. Leaders do not wait for recognition. They create the evidence that eventually demands recognition. Let your ledger of work, not the applause, be your scorekeeper. Invest in a small set of sacred tools and master them. A writer needs 3 tools: a morning practice, a ruthless editing standard, and public deadlines. An entrepreneur needs 3 tools: customer conversations, prototype cycles, and a measurement system that does not flatter. A leader needs 3 tools: radical candor, decision, friction removal, and a rehearsal routine for communication. Mastery is not broad, it is deep. You cannot be competent at everything, but you can be dominant at the few things that move the needle. Find those few and become a machine at them. Depth yields leverage. Leverage yields speed. Speed yields options. The people who alter history do not wait for permission. They take the stage sometimes before they feel ready. And then they learn to play the role with increasing skill. This is not pretense. It is training the system by acting as if. That act of as if must be paired with ruthless honesty. Own your limits. Recruit talent where you lack. And practice until your performance matches your intent. Pretend without delusion. Use the posture of someone who has done the work while simultaneously doing the work you claim to have done. The nervous system tolerates this paradox. It shifts identity when action and assertion align repeatedly. Make a covenant with your future self. Refuse to hand them excuses. Excuses are the currency of stagnant people who still hope the world will restructure itself around comfort. Your future self will thank you for simple, painful things: an aligned calendar, a savings cushion, a published first draft, a seeded prototype, an honest conversation you nearly avoided. These are small betrayals of comfort that compound into a life that resists accident. Do not confuse sacrifice with loss. Think of sacrifice as capital invested in future freedom. When you gather allies, gather those who increase the amplitude of your action. A single person who expands your thinking can do more for your trajectory than 100 who applaud from the bleachers. Find people who are doing what you intend to do and study their tempo. Not to imitate slavishly, but to understand the cadence required to sustain growth. Learn their rituals, adapt their checks, then improvise your own rhythm. The fastest route to competence is to stand close enough to better practitioners so that their habits reverberate into yours. Endings are created in beginnings. The life you will have 10 years from now is largely a reflection of what you begin today. Do not delay the first iteration because you misinterpret readiness for perfection. Perfection is a moving target that hides progress behind polish. Make the first version public, accept the criticism that is useful, reject the noise that is not, and then refine. This is how prototypes become platforms and platforms become legacies. You will never feel perfectly ready. You will feel reasonably prepared the first time you act. That is enough. Now, in whatever atmosphere you find yourself, quiet kitchen table, crowded office late, night studio, do a small, honest thing that aligns with the person you intend to become. Write the first paragraph, make the first call. Send the first link. It need not be grand. It must be decisive. Record it. Measure the reaction. Tell someone you respect what you did and ask for blunt feedback. Repeat tomorrow. Repeat the next day. Build a cycle so tight that hesitation cannot enter between the signal and the response. Permission is a surface phenomenon. The deeper architecture of your life is built with commitments, experiments, feedback loops, and relentless execution. When you set those into motion, permission becomes redundant, because the world begins to respond to the evidence you have manufactured. Winners move without permission, not because they are reckless, but because they are prepared, and because preparation has a momentum that renders permission unnecessary. This is your summons, not to some abstract betterment, but to the concrete reconstitution of your everyday. Begin the work that does not flatter, but converts. Begin the morning habit that produces output. Begin the weekly ritual that protects your best hours. Begin the difficult conversation that opens a door. Begin the prototype that proves a hypothesis. Do it today. Do it now. You will not be transformed by a single speech. You will be transformed by repeated, stubborn acts of alignment. But the first act is crucial because it changes the grammar of your account. It converts possibility into plan and intention into history. Move without waiting for permission. Build the evidence. Force the future to answer to your work. The clock will not bend for the hesitant. It will bend for the prepared step forward. Take the small, decisive act that initiates momentum. Then watch as the world begins slowly and then all at once, to give you the reasons you once begged for.